The chamber of the Galactic Council was built to humble anyone who entered it. A vast crescent of polished stone and steel, hanging in orbit above a jewel-blue planet, filled with light that shimmered through crystalline walls. Every seat at the crescent table belonged to a species that had clawed its way to power over centuries of war, diplomacy, and dominance. Their banners hung above them, each one glowing with shifting symbols of pride. Every species except one, humanity. The humans had no banner, no seat. They were allowed only a narrow section at the edge of the floor, a small stand that looked more like an afterthought than a place of honor. They were tolerated here, not respected. Corporal Elias Kane sat stiff behind the stand, his jaw tight, fists hidden under the polished desk. The uniform he wore wasn't a soldier's anymore. It had been stripped of rank, replaced by the dark, plain attire of a representative. But the soldier still lived inside him, coiled tight. Every word echoing in this chamber stabbed at wounds he had carried since his days in uniform. At the center of the chamber floated the Speaker of the Council, a towering being of light and shifting energy. Its voice rippled across the hall like thunder through glass. "We open the matter of Earth's petition. The Terran delegation has asked for equal defense rights under the Accord. Their case shall be heard." A wave of dismissive murmurs swept across the chamber. The first to speak was the Arcari delegate, a scaled, reptilian form with eyes that glowed a harsh yellow. His lips curled into something that might have been a smile or a sneer. "Humans are unstable, violent, incapable of true diplomacy. Their history drips with blood and fire. To grant them military privileges would invite chaos into this council." The words slithered across the chamber, echoed by low hums, guttural tones, and approving clicks. Some delegates laughed openly, their gestures mocking. Elia's knuckles tightened against the desk. He forced himself not to rise, not to shout, not yet. Then the All-Three envoy stood, tall and feathered, her wings folding tight as her voice rang sharp. "Their home world is a tinderbox of greed and war, a planet forever bleeding from its own divisions, and yet they demand equality among us? Dangerous, naive, unthinkable." More laughter followed. Elia's eyes slid toward the human chair where the appointed diplomat sat. An old man with thinning hair, trembling lips, and eyes that never dared to meet the council's gaze. His hands clutched the table as if it might protect him from the storm of disdain. He whispered nothing, argued nothing. Fear bound him in silence. The speaker's light pulsed. "The vote is not required. The council rejects Earth's petition. Humanity shall remain under observation. They are denied military privileges, denied expansion rights. Should they attempt to militarize beyond their quota, sanctions will be imposed. This matter is closed." The word slammed like a hammer, closed. Elias felt the heat in his chest rise, a slow burn that had been building for years. He thought of the colonies where he had fought, places where council fleets never came. He thought of the men and women he had buried beneath alien soil, while the council's banners hung proud and untouched. Humanity had bled alone, built alone, and now they wanted Earth kneeling forever. When the session adjourned, the old diplomat turned to him, whispering with cracked lips, "Best to let it go, son. We cannot afford war." But Elia's voice was ice. "War has already been chosen, not by us, by them." That night aboard the delegation ship orbiting the council station, Elias met with those who mattered. Not politicians, soldiers, commanders, veterans who had lived through every slight, every abandonment. The room was thick with silence, the kind that trembles with rage unspoken. "They will never give us respect," growled General Rourke, his face carved with scars. "Not unless we carve it into their memory with fire." Another voice, softer but wary. "Their fleets outnumber ours 100-1. Their technology outpaces us by centuries." Elias stood, cutting the words like a blade. "Outnumber us, yes, outgun us, yes, but they don't understand us. They don't understand why we fight. We don't fight for balance. We don't fight for pride. We fight because we refuse to kneel. And when we fight, we don't stop until the stars burn." The silence after was heavy, and then slowly grim smiles spread, not madness, not recklessness, but inevitability. Plans were whispered, ships recalled, factories retooled, colonies armed. Humanity, once divided, found unity in humiliation. Across Earth, the footage of the council's sneers and mockery spread like wildfire. Every insult replayed across news screens, every dismissive gesture replayed in orbiting stations. For once, humanity's endless fractures aligned under one banner. Never again. Factories that had once built cars roared with the forging of warships. Cities that had once drowned in apathy became engines of steel and fire. Soldiers were recalled. Young men and women volunteered in floods. Earth itself became a furnace, burning humiliation into resolve. The council thought their decree ended the matter. What they had done was light a fuse. Weeks later, Elias walked the underground halls of the newly forged Terran Defense Council, what soldiers now called the War Council. The air was heavy with oil, sparks, and determination. Old generals who had once despised one another sat shoulder to shoulder. Admirals who had never shared plans now traded strategies like brothers. A holographic map glowed above them, spilling red light across the chamber. Alien patrols, shipping routes, vulnerabilities, and arrogance, always arrogance. The council had grown complacent, certain no one could challenge them. "Hit and fade," muttered an admiral, stabbing at the map. "Their ships are bigger, slower, ambush convoys, bleed them until numbers mean nothing." "Sabotage," added a general. "Their stations run on bloated networks. We adapt faster, we can break them." Elias leaned forward, his voice sharp. "And morale, they thrive on unity, but unity built on arrogance. Break that and they collapse. Show them the primitive species, turning victories against them, and they'll start pointing claws at each other instead of us." The room went still, then nods followed. The decision was sealed. Humanity would strike, not with fleets of glory, but with the fury of survival. The first battle came in silence. A council trade convoy moved across neutral space, guarded by sleek frigates that gleamed under distant suns. They had no fear, no urgency. Who would dare touch them? From the void, ragged Terran destroyers emerged. Black steel, scarred hulls, weapons crude but bristling, they swarmed like wolves. Railguns thundered. Torpedoes screamed. The council frigates scrambled, caught unprepared. In 12 minutes it was over. Alien wreckage drifted through the void. Human ships vanished into the dark. Not a single vessel was captured intact. Every core detonated before surrender. A message written in fire. On the bridge of the Resolute, Elias Kane stood silent as the footage replayed. His crew erupted into cheers, eyes burning with faith. But Elias did not cheer. He knew what came next. The council would not ignore them. They would rage, and rage would become war. Far across the galaxy, in the shimmering chamber of the council, voices screamed. The Archery demanded annihilation. The Althery demanded blockades. The speaker's light flickered with unease. The council had been mocked. But they still laughed. "Primitive posturing," one envoy hissed. "A tantrum from a child denied its toy." Their laughter still echoed when Elias looked out from the Resolute's viewport, watching the council's station shrink into the void. His fists clenched, his voice a whisper. "They will learn what it means to underestimate us." And behind him, the alarms of preparation echoed louder than any decree. The Resolute cut through the void like a blade of iron, its engines humming with a low, restless growl. It was no polished cruiser of the council, no shimmering monument of alien engineering. Its corridors smelled of oil, steel, and sweat. The plating still carried scars from construction welds, patched over by hands that had worked without sleep for weeks. But to the men and women aboard, it wasn't weakness. It was proof that they had built it themselves, piece by piece, fueled not by pride, but by rage. Elias Kane walked those halls, boots echoing against metal. Soldiers looked up as he passed. Miners turned gunners, students turned technicians, farmers turned soldiers. Their eyes burned with something he hadn't seen in years: faith. They believed humanity could stand even against giants. And that terrified him more than their laughter had. The War Council wasted no time. With the footage of the first ambush spreading like wildfire across Earth and her colonies, morale had risen to a fever pitch. Volunteers poured into enlistment stations, factories thundered with production, and shipyards groaned under the demand for more hulls. But Elias' new enthusiasm was not enough. He had studied the Council fleets. They were vast, disciplined, terrifying in their order. Humanity could not win in open battle. They had to fight like wolves. The second strike came quickly. A listening post at the edge of Council space, small but critical, watching the neutral border. The plan was brutal and simple: raid, strip, destroy. The Resolute and a handful of smaller corvettes burst from warp, engines screaming. Before alarms could even cycle, Terran Marines stormed the decks. Gunfire echoed through the halls. Alien guards fell in a storm of steel, their elegant plasma weapons useless against the sheer ferocity of the assault. The humans did not hold the station. They stripped it. They planted charges. and when they left, the post was nothing but fire drifting in the dark. Elias stood at the viewport as the wreckage spun. His reflection in the glass looked older, sharper, scarred by shadows. Behind him, his second-in-command, Commander Hall, scarred, grizzled, a veteran of too many forgotten wars, spoke low. "They'll notice now, they'll come harder." "Good," Elias replied. His voice was steady, but inside a weight pressed against him. "Let them come." The council noticed. Panic spread through the chamber of arrogance. For centuries, their fleets had patrolled the stars unchallenged. No rebellion had lasted more than weeks, no uprising had drawn more than token resistance. But humanity was not rebelling. Humanity was fighting. The Arcari delegate hissed for immediate extermination. The Althari demanded fleets dispatched to Sol to blockade Earth itself. The Cathari muttered about restraint, warning that too much force might reveal weakness. But through all the fury, one truth bled through. The council was afraid. And fear breeds cracks. On Earth, those cracks were studied with relentless hunger. In the underground chambers of Geneva, the War Council pored over every intercepted transmission, every whisper from sympathetic smugglers, every weakness revealed by the Council's own arrogance. "They don't fight wars anymore," an admiral growled, stabbing at the map. "They've forgotten what real enemies look like. They've grown soft." Elia's gaze was hard. "Then we'll remind them." Preparation was brutal. Factories bled steel into warships. Civilian freighters were stripped and armed. Fuel was rationed, food cut, luxuries erased. Families sent sons and daughters to war. Streets once filled with protests became rivers of recruits. The endless fractures of Earth's politics blurred beneath one banner, the banner of survival. But survival came at a cost. One evening, Elias walked the lower decks of the Resolute. Recruits polished rifles, their hands trembling. Some carved names into the metal, promises to families they might never see again. Others sat in silence, staring at faded photos tucked into armor. A boy barely 20 stopped him, his voice low, shaking. "Sir, do you think we can win?" Elias looked at him. He saw the same fear he had seen in his own men years ago in battles no one remembered. He could have told him the truth, that the Council's fleets outnumbered them 100-1, that by every calculation, humanity was doomed. Instead, he said, "We won't win by their rules, but yes, we'll win, because they've forgotten what it means to bleed, we haven't." The boy nodded, gripping the rifle tighter. And Elias wondered if he had just given him hope, or a lie. The storm broke at Vega 7. The Council finally responded. 50 ships, sleek and deadly, descended upon the human colony with fire and arrogance. It was meant to be a show of force, a demonstration of what happened to species that dared to defy them. The Terran fleet met them head-on. The Resolute dropped from warp into chaos, its hull screaming under immediate fire. Alien plasma scorched across shields, ripping into metal, but the Terrans did not turn back. Railguns roared, torpedoes streaked, smaller destroyers darted like wolves. They struck engines, crippled escorts, sabotaged cruisers from within. They rammed when outgunned, detonated cores rather than surrender. The battle raged for hours, fire and wreckage painting the void. Elias stood at the bridge, gripping the railing as alarms screamed. Sparks rained from the ceiling, men shouted over the roar. Commander Hall bellowed, shields failing on Sector 3. "Keep the guns hot," Elias roared back. "We're not dying with ammo still loaded." The Resolute dove between two alien cruisers, railguns hammering one to pieces while torpedoes gutted the other. Around them, human ships burned, but so did the Council's. For every Terran vessel lost, 3 Council ships fell, crippled by tactics they could not comprehend. And when the smoke cleared, Vega 7 still stood. The Council fleet limped away in disgrace. News spread faster than light. Across the galaxy, whispers rose. The humans had stood against the Council and bloodied them. Some species mocked it as luck. Others began to doubt the Council's invincibility. And for the first time in centuries, the Council's unity cracked. Inside the chamber of arrogance, voices screamed over one another. The Arcari blamed the Althari for retreat. The Althari accused the Cathari of cowardice. The speaker's shimmering light flickered with unease. For Elias Kane, there was no triumph, only cold certainty. This was no longer about recognition. This was war, and it would not end until one side was broken beyond repair. Back aboard the Resolute, silence fell after the battle. The crew sat bloodied, exhausted, eyes hollow from hours of fire. Some cheered, some wept, some simply stared into the void, unable to believe they were still alive. Hall leaned against the console, his voice rough. "We did it. We stood against them and lived." Elias shook his head. "No, we've shown them we're a threat, and now they'll come with everything." He looked out at the wreckage drifting, the stars burning beyond. His chest was tight, his fists clenched. Humanity had drawn blood, yes, but blood demands blood. And the Council would not forgive. The galaxy trembled after Vega 7. In Council space, whispers turned to shouts. Species that had once bowed to the Chamber's authority now questioned its strength. If the mighty fleets of the Accord could be bloodied by the so-called primitives, what else had they lied about? The speaker's light pulsed louder and brighter than ever, but even brilliance could not hide the cracks in glass. For humanity, Vega 7 was not a victory. It was gasoline poured on fire. Factories that had once struggled under rationing now thundered day and night. Cities that had been divided by politics blurred into steel and smoke. Children marched into training camps, farmers welded weapons, miners became engineers. Earth itself, scarred, wounded, forever fractious, was no longer a collection of nations. It was a war machine. And Elias Kane was its blade. The Resolute floated in dry dock above Luna, its hull torn and scorched from battle. Sparks rained from welders, repair drones scuttled like ants, and the hum of reforging echoed through its decks. Elias walked the corridors, boots heavy on the metal, eyes sharp as he inspected the work. Everywhere he looked, he saw the same thing: resolve. Crewmen bled their fingers raw tightening bolts. Marines drilled in empty cargo bays until they collapsed from exhaustion. Engineers slept curled under consoles, waking only to solder more circuits. They were not soldiers by birth. They were soldiers by necessity, and that made them dangerous. Hall met him on the bridge, his scarred face grim but his eyes burning with a fire Elias recognized. "Word is spreading, Commander. The Council's fractured. Some want annihilation, others fear the cost. They argue more than they act." "Good," Elias muttered. "Let them waste breath while we sharpen knives." The sharpening came quickly. Operation Ember was drawn, a campaign not of defense but of offense. "Our strength isn't numbers," Elias said before the War Council. The holographic map glowed with red lines of supply routes, vulnerable points where bloated alien networks stretched thin. "Our strength is speed, precision, adaptation. We strike where they're fat and slow, and we bleed them until their numbers mean nothing." Admiral Harrow, one of the oldest voices in the room, shook his head. "Bleed them, yes, but eventually they'll rally, and when they do, we won't hold." "Then we break them before they can," Elias replied. His voice was calm, sharp, steady. "We don't wait for their hammer. We turn the galaxy into 1,000 cuts until they bleed themselves dry." The chamber fell silent, then slowly nods spread. Operation Ember was set into motion. The next months were chaos. Terran ships struck convoys deep in enemy territory, ambushing fat cargo haulers and shredding their escorts. Stations thought untouchable were sabotaged from within, their networks hacked, and their power cores detonated in blinding fire. Smugglers whispered of human ships appearing like ghosts, striking and vanishing into the dark. Every small victory was broadcast back to Earth, stirring the furnace of rage into something unstoppable. The Council called them terrorists, barbarians, lunatics, but the galaxy had seen the footage. They saw the barbarians crippling fleets with a fraction of the power. They saw the primitives tearing down giants with ingenuity and fire. And the illusion of invincibility cracked wider. But cracks did not stop the storm. The Council gathered. For once they spoke with one voice, not out of unity but out of desperation. Humanity had to be erased. 200 ships pulled from half a dozen species marched toward Earth. The largest armada seen in centuries. Their message was simple: humanity would burn. When the reports reached Geneva, silence filled the War Council chamber. Generals who had shouted and cursed days before now sat pale and quiet. 200 ships, more than humanity had ever faced. "This is it," Admiral Harrow muttered. His voice was flat, hollow. "They'll break us in Sol, Earth will fall." Elias leaned forward, fists clenched. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "No, Earth will not fall, not quietly. If they come, they will bleed for every inch of soil, and if they bleed enough, their unity will shatter." The plan was madness. The Kuiper Belt, a graveyard of asteroids, a labyrinth of frozen rock and drifting shadows. It was there humanity would fight. Not in Earth skis, not in glorious defense, but in ambush. Every Terran fleet was recalled. Freighters were armed, stations retooled, asteroids hollowed into traps. Mines were planted along approach vectors. Engines were welded to rocks, turning stone into moving fortresses. Even the asteroid colonies joined, their children forging weapons in caverns of ice. Elias walked the decks of the Resolute, passing Marines sharpening knives, engineers wiring explosives, recruits writing final letters home. No one asked if they would survive. They all knew the answer. Hall met him at the viewport, arms crossed. If this fails, humanity burns. If it fails, Elias said, his voice steady, then we make sure they never forget us. The Council Armada entered Sol in glittering formation, weapons glowing like suns. 200 ships, cruisers, destroyers, carriers bristling with arrogance. They advanced in perfect order, confident, certain that humanity would break before their might. They found silence. Then the void erupted. Torpedoes screamed from hidden launchers, detonating before shields could cycle. Half a dozen ships burst into fire before alarms even sounded. Asteroids came alive, railguns mounted on stone tearing through escorts. Mines detonated in blossoms of light, scattering formations into chaos. From the shadows, Terran ships struck like wolves. The Resolute led the charge, its guns roaring, its hull shaking with fury. Elias gripped the railing as alarms shrieked around him. Sparks rained from the ceiling. Men shouted over chaos. Hall bellowed, "We're surrounded." "Good," Elias roared back. "Let them close in. The tighter they press, the more we bleed them." The Resolute dove between two alien cruisers, railguns hammering one to shrapnel while torpedoes gutted the other. Marines boarded enemy carriers, detonating cores from within. Smaller destroyers darted in and out, striking engines, vanishing before retaliation. The void became a storm of wreckage and blood. But the numbers still pressed forward. Slowly, inevitably, the tide began to turn. Human ships fell one by one, torn apart by plasma fire. For every alien ship destroyed, more advanced. The Kuiper line was painted in fire, but the Armada pushed through. When the order to retreat came, it was like a blade to Elias' chest. The Resolute limped back into orbit, hull cracked, engines sputtering. Around it, shattered ships burned, drifting like gravestones in the void. Thousands dead, dozens of ships gone, and still the enemy advanced. From the bridge, Elias stared down at Earth, blue and fragile against the dark. His home, their home. Behind him, the Armada still marched, bloodied but unbroken. Hall's voice was low, grim. "They'll be here within days." Elias clenched his fists against the railing, his voice burning through the silence. "Then Earth will not fall quietly. If they come, they will drown in blood." The alarms rang across Earth before dawn. From orbit, the sky lit with fire as the Council Armada entered range, 200 ships bristling with plasma and arrogance. Their hulls gleamed like suns against the black, their formation perfect, their weapons burning. They came not as invaders, not even as conquerors. They came as executioners. Their message was clear: surrender or burn. No one surrendered. Elias Kane stood at the helm of the Resolute, its hull patched and scarred, its crew gaunt from weeks of constant war. Around him, the Terran fleet drifted in tight formation, battered ships, freighters welded into war machines, orbital platforms built from wreckage. Below them, Earth glowed blue and fragile, a jewel against the dark. "Contacts closing," Hall growled from the tactical station, his scarred fingers flying over controls. "They're spreading for orbital bombardment." "Let them," Elias muttered. His jaw was tight, his voice steady. "Every inch they take, they pay for in blood." The first salvos fell. Council ships rained plasma into the upper atmosphere, scorching the skis. Explosions thundered like artificial lightning, lighting oceans and continents below. Cities shook as shockwaves rolled across the land. Skyscrapers crumbled, streets split, whole districts burned. But Earth did not break. Orbital platforms hidden in debris fields spat railgun fire into the void. Missiles screamed upward from silos buried deep in deserts, mountains, forests. Human ships surged forward, railguns hammering, torpedoes carving through the Council's flanks. The void became chaos. On the bridge of the Resolute, sparks rained as enemy fire tore across shields. Elias gripped the railing, shouting over the roar of battle. "Keep pressure on their carriers. Don't let them launch boarding waves." Hall snarled back, "Shields at 20%. We can't hold this line." "Then don't hold it," Elias snapped. "Break them." The order was madness, but humanity thrived in madness. Ships rammed alien cruisers, detonating cores at point-blank range. Sabotage teams boarded enemy vessels, planting charges in engines before vanishing into the void. Fighters broke formation, darting through gaps, hammering weak points with reckless precision. The Council came expecting order. They found chaos. And chaos bled them. Below, Earth itself became a battlefield. In the ruins of New York, civilians fought from barricaded streets, hurling Molotovs at armored dropships. In the deserts of Africa, missile silos fired until their launch tubes glowed red-hot. In the mountains of Europe, children carried rifles, fighting beside veterans who had once sworn they'd never fight again. Every city became a fortress, every street a trench. Humanity had no illusions. They were not defending land, they were buying time with blood. Hours stretched into days. The battle in orbit raged, the void littered with wreckage. Whole sections of the fleet vanished in blossoms of light. Stations crumbled, platforms fell, cities below scorched in firestorms. On the Resolute, alarms screamed constantly, the ship bleeding sparks and smoke. Men shouted over chaos, some with voices raw from hours of screaming orders. Engineers welded plates over ruptures even as plasma seared the hull. Marines carried the wounded with one hand and fired rifles with the other. Hull's face was streaked with blood, his voice hoarse. "Commander, we can't take another volley. The hull's tearing apart." Elia's voice was iron. "Then we make it count." He turned to the crew, eyes burning. "All ships converge, don't defend, strike, tear them apart." The order rippled across the fleet. Human ships roared forward, no longer holding lines but plunging headlong into the heart of the armada. Railguns spat fire. Torpedoes gutted carriers. Freighters overloaded their engines, turning themselves into suicide drones that rammed through alien hulls. The sky above Earth became a graveyard of burning wreckage. Alien ships fell by the dozens, ripped apart by weapons crude but merciless. Human ships fell too, each one a funeral pyre against the void. But for every Terran vessel shattered, the Council bled deeper. Elias stood on the bridge as the Resolute slammed broadside into a Cathari cruiser, railguns hammering its flank. The alien vessel shuddered, split, and erupted in fire. Cheers erupted from the crew, but Elias did not smile. His gaze locked on the tactical display. Red icons still swarmed, dozens upon dozens, pressing closer. "We can't win this," Hull rasped, gripping the console. "Not like this." "No," Elias said. His voice was quiet, steady, burning. "But we can break them." He leaned forward, his fists clenched. "Signal the fleet. No more retreats. No more lines. Every ship left standing. We take the fight into their core. If we die dragging them down with us." The final charge began. The Terran fleet roared into the heart of the Council's formation, tearing holes through their perfect order. Ships collided in suicide strikes, detonations ripping through escorts. Human fighters darted into hangars, detonating cores from within. Marines boarded cruisers, cutting down defenders in brutal close quarters. The void burned. From Earth's surface, survivors looked up through skis scarred with plasma fire and saw the heavens lit like a storm. They saw human ships falling, burning, but never surrendering. They saw alien giants reeling, breaking formation, pulling back under fire they had not expected. They saw defiance turned into survival. By the time the battle ended, Earth still stood. Scarred, burned, cities reduced to rubble, oceans boiling in places from orbital fire, but alive. The Council fleet limped away, dozens of ships gutted, hundreds crippled. What had been an armada of execution left in disgrace. On the bridge of the Resolute, silence fell. The crew sat hollow-eyed, armor scorched, hands trembling. Hull leaned against the console, his voice low, cracked. "They're retreating." Elias stared at the void, at the burning wreckage drifting like gravestones across the black. His jaw tightened. "This isn't victory," he said. "It's only survival." Hull turned, blood still dripping from his temple. "Then what is it?" Elias' eyes burned, his voice steady. "It's the beginning." And far across the galaxy, in the fractured chamber of the Council, silence reigned. The speaker's light flickered, dimmer than ever. Delegates shouted, accused, screamed over one another. The Arcari demanded more fleets. The Althari accused the Cathari of cowardice. The Cathari accused the Arcari of reckless losses. The council was still powerful, still vast, still dangerous. But for the first time in centuries, they were afraid. And fear was a weapon humanity had just learned to wield. The war room beneath, Geneva smelled of smoke and blood. The walls still bore scorch marks from the council's orbital fire, reminders that Earth had nearly burned. Outside, whole districts lay in ruins, cities buried under ash, oceans still steaming. But here, in the dim light of cracked screens and flickering maps, humanity's generals and admirals gathered. For the first time in living memory, no one spoke of nations. No one argued about borders, trade, or politics. They spoke with one voice, forged in the fire of survival. And that voice was vengeance. Admiral Harrow's voice was gravel, heavy with exhaustion. We bought time at Earth, but time is all we bought. They'll come again, stronger, and we can't fight them head-on forever. Murmurs filled the chamber. Old generals leaned forward, eyes burning despite the lines of age. Commanders gripped the table, their uniforms still stained with soot. Elias Kane stood at the center, his hands braced on the edge of the war table. The holographic map projected before them glowed with council territory, fortresses, patrol routes, bastions that stretched across the galaxy. They want us contained, Elias said, his voice sharp, carrying through the chamber. Weak, begging for scraps, waiting to die on our knees, we won't give them that. He stabbed his finger at the map at a burning red icon. We take the fight to them deep, where they think they're untouchable. We don't defend anymore, we strike. The chamber erupted in arguments. Some shouted that it was madness, others that it was suicide. But beneath the fear, anger burned hotter, and anger demanded blood. Where? One general barked. Elia's eyes narrowed. Norak Prime, the Arcari supply station, a fortress world, their jewel. Gasps rippled through the room. Norak Prime was legendary, an armored citadel bristling with guns thought to be impregnable. That's suicide, Harrow growled. That's the point, Elias shot back. If we take it, if humanity burns their fortress to ash, then the galaxy will never again believe in their invincibility. We won't just fight, we'll humiliate them. Silence followed, then one by one grim nods spread. Operation Iron Fang was born. The preparation was brutal. Every factory roared, every worker bled their hands raw. Wreckage from Earth's defense was salvaged, reforged into warships. Volunteers poured into barracks, their eyes hollow but burning. The young who once dreaded conscription now marched willingly, their fury stronger than their fear. On the Resolute, Elias walked the decks, passing Marines sharpening blades, engineers welding plates, recruits whispering prayers. The ship still carried scars from Earth's battle, its plating blackened, its corridors patched with makeshift repairs. But to the crew, those scars weren't weakness. They were proof of survival. Hall found him in the hangar, arms crossed, his face lined with exhaustion. You know what this means, Commander. Half the fleet won't come back, maybe more. Elias nodded. His voice was steady. Then we make sure the half that does carries victory. The fleet jumped into Arcari space in silence. Dozens of ships, dark and brutal, hulls patched with welded scars, weapons primed. They moved like predators into the void, silent and merciless. Before them, Norak Prime rose from the planet's surface like a crown of steel. Guns bristled from its rings, its orbital fleet stretched in glittering formation, its shield grid glowing like a star. On the bridge of the Resolute, the air was suffocating. Marines checked weapons, officers muttered coordinates, engineers prayed under their breath. Hall stood at Elias' side, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning. Enemy patrols have spotted us, the tactical officer barked. Then let's announce ourselves, Elias said. His voice was calm, sharp. Fire. The void erupted. Railguns thundered, torpedoes streaked. The Resolute tore through patrol ships before they could raise shields. Smaller Terran destroyers swarmed, darting into gaps, hammering engines, detonating fuel lines. Suicide drones, old freighters overloaded with explosives, plunged into defenses, shattering whole wings in blossoms of fire. The Council's formation collapsed into chaos. Station shields holding, Hall roared, clutching his console as the bridge shook. Target generators, Elias snapped. Break their shield and the crown falls. Missiles streaked into the station's outer rim, detonating along its glowing rings. One by one, shield nodes flickered, collapsed, and died. Shields at 60%. Keep firing, Elias shouted. Don't give them a breath. The Resolute dove through the storm, railguns pounding, slugs tearing through escorts. Dropships screamed from its bays, plunging toward the station's surface, packed with Marines who knew they were storming hell. The assault on Norek Prime was fire and steel. Human boots slammed onto alien soil. Archery defenders shrieked, their scaled armor gleaming as plasma fire cut through the air. Human rifles answered with brutal precision, tearing them down in corridors thick with smoke and blood. Every hallway became a furnace, every chamber a slaughterhouse. Elias himself led the charge through the outer spire, his rail rifle hammering, Hall at his side with a combat blade in hand. Marines stormed behind them, grenades flashing, rifles roaring. At the heart of the command spire, the archery commander stood defiant, towering, scaled, eyes burning with fury. "You savages," he snarled. "You'll burn for this. Humanity will be ash before this war ends." Elias stared at him coldly. "You should have left us alone." The commander lunged, but Hall struck first, his blade tearing across scaled armor. The archery roared, staggered, and Elias' rifle cut him down. When the spire fell, Norek Prime fell with it. The explosion tore across the planet like a newborn star. Charges planted in the station's core detonated, ripping through its defenses in a storm of fire. Its shields collapsed, its guns silenced, its fleets shattered. From orbit, the Resolute watched as the jewel of the archery, thought untouchable, thought invincible, burned. The silence on the bridge lasted only a heartbeat. Then the crew erupted in cheers, roars of triumph that shook the deck. Elias did not cheer. He only stared at the wreckage, his jaw tight, his voice low. "This isn't the end, this is the spark." Hall turned, his face smeared with blood and smoke. "The galaxy will never forgive this. They'll come with everything." Elias' eyes burned with cold fire. "Good, then we'll break them with everything." Across the stars, news of Norek Prime spread like wildfire. To humanity, it was triumph, proof that the Council could bleed, proof that giants could fall. To the Council, it was sacrilege, a humiliation so deep it tore at their pride like knives. In the chamber of arrogance, voices screamed, alliances cracked. The Archery howled for blood. The Althari accused them of incompetence. The Cathari demanded sanctions. Smaller species whispered in fear, wondering if humanity had just done the impossible. And through it all, one truth burned brighter than any voice. The Council was not invincible. On the Resolute, Elias stood at the viewport, staring at the planet burning below. His chest heaved, his fists clenched, his heart pounding with the weight of what they had done. Hall joined him, his voice low. "We've lit the galaxy on fire, Commander, and now the Council will come for us all." Elias turned, his voice iron. "Let them come. The more they rage, the more they fracture. All we need is to survive long enough for their unity to break." Hall gave a grim smile. "And survival has always been our weapon." Elias nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the void beyond. "Then let's show them just how sharp survival can be." The galaxy shook after Norek Prime. Humanity had done the unthinkable, stormed a Council stronghold and burned it to ash. To the oppressed races, it was proof the giants could bleed. To the Council, it was blasphemy, a wound deeper than fleets lost, deeper than soldiers dead. It was humiliation carved into their pride. For centuries, their dominance had been unquestioned. Now, whispers spread across the stars. If the Council can fall to humans, what else have they lied about? The speaker's chamber glowed with fury. Delegates shrieked, claws and wings raised, voices overlapping in chaos. "The Archery have failed," roared an Althari, feathers bristling. "The Althari withheld fleets," hissed the Archery in return. The Cathari were too slow to respond. The speaker's light blazed, thunder rolling through the chamber. "Enough! Humanity will not stand another cycle. They will be erased." And for the first time in centuries, the Council agreed. The intelligence reached Geneva within days. 500 ships, drawn from half a dozen species. The largest armada the galaxy had seen in living memory. Not scattered patrols, not fractured squadrons, armadas fused together in desperation. Their target, Earth. The War Council chamber fell into silence, as the report scrolled across screens. Generals, pale with exhaustion, stared at the numbers as if they were a death sentence. 500 ships. Humanity had barely survived 200. "This is it," Admiral Harrow muttered, his voice hollow. "They'll break us in Saul, and when they do, the rest will collapse." No one argued. No one pretended otherwise. The numbers were overwhelming. Until Elias Kane stood. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Then we don't fight their war." The eyes of every officer turned toward him. "They expect us to defend Earth again," Elias continued, his voice sharp, deliberate. "Static lines, glorious last stands, that's how they fight, but we're not them. We don't fight for balance. We fight to survive, to adapt, to win by any means." A general spat the words like disbelief. 500 ships, how do you propose we fight that?" Elias leaned forward, his fists braced against the table. "By breaking them from within. Their unity is already cracked. Fear binds them tighter than trust. If we bleed them enough, if we shatter their illusion of invincibility, their unity won't hold. They'll turn on each other." The chamber was silent. The plan was madness, but madness had carried humanity this far. Operation Silent Fang was born. Preparation was desperate. Every Terran fleet was recalled, freighters stripped for war, drones cobbled together from wreckage, their engines overloaded with explosives, mines planted in likely approach vectors, even civilian ships welded cannons to their hulls. Elias walked the decks of the Resolute, watching his crew move with grim purpose. Engineers kissed family photos before vanishing into engine bays. Marines sharpened knives not for utility, but for ritual. Children too young for war lied about their age and strapped on armor. No one asked if they would survive. They all knew the answer. Hall met him in the hangar, arms crossed, his scarred face unreadable. "Commander, if this fails..." Elias cut him off. "If this fails, humanity burns, but if it works, the Council tears itself apart." Hall studied him for a long moment, then gave a grim smile. "Then let's make sure it works." The fleet jumped into hell. The Council armada filled the void. 500 ships, a wall of fire and steel stretching across the stars. Cruisers, carriers, dreadnoughts glowing with plasma. Their formation was perfect, their weapons primed. Against them, humanity's fleet looked like insects before giants. But ants can still bite. On the bridge of the Resolute, silence reigned. Every officer knew this could be their last moment. Elias stood at the helm, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Signal the fleet," he said quietly. "Silent Fang begins." The first strike was chaos. Hidden mines detonated across the enemy's flanks, tearing through escorts before shields cycled. Suicide drones streaked forward, detonating in blossoms of fire that shredded carriers. Railguns thundered, torpedoes roared. The void erupted in madness. The Resolute led the charge, railguns hammering, tearing holes through cruisers 3 times its size. Terran destroyers darted in and out of the formation, biting engines, vanishing into shadows. Fighters plunged into hangars, detonating cores before defenders could react. Council ships reeled. Their perfect formation crumbled under the chaos. "Commander, they're scattering," Hull roared over the chaos. "Good," Elias snapped. His voice was iron. "Scatter them further, make them bleed." But the cost was unbearable. Plasma fire shredded Terran ships by the dozens. Entire wings vanished in seconds. Freighters overloaded their cores, ramming into carriers in suicide strikes that lit the void with fire. Comms filled with screams, orders, silence as names blinked out one after another. The Resolute itself groaned under fire, its hull cracking, its shields failing. Sparks rained across the bridge, alarms shrieking, smoke choking the air. Hall shouted over the chaos, blood streaking his temple. "We're being surrounded." Elias gritted his teeth, his voice a snarl. "Good, let them close. The tighter they press, the more they bleed." For every human ship lost, 3 Council vessels fell. For every volley endured, humanity struck harder. The void became a graveyard of wreckage, flaming carcasses drifting like tombstones across the stars. But survival came at a price. Ship after ship vanished from the board. Names Elias knew, voices he had heard, lives he had carried, all silenced. The Resolute shook under another hit, alarms screaming, its engines sputtering. Hull turned to him, his voice raw. "Commander, we can't hold much longer." Elias stared at the tactical display, at the swarm of red icons still pressing forward. His jaw tightened. "Then we don't hold," he said. His voice was steady, burning. "We break them." The order spread. Human ships plunged deeper into the armada, detonating cores point-blank, dragging alien cruisers into the atmosphere of nearby worlds to burn in firestorms. Marines boarded dreadnoughts, slaughtering crews in brutal silence before detonating reactors. The Council armada reeled. Their unity cracked under the storm. All three ships accused Arcari of abandoning flanks. Cathari commanders snarled at all three hesitation. Some fleets withdrew altogether, unwilling to bleed for allies they despised. Silent Fang had not destroyed them, but it had fractured them. And in war, fractures are fatal. When the order to retreat finally came, it was not fear that forced it, it was survival. The Resolute limped back into Sol, hull shattered, engines sputtering, its decks thick with smoke and blood. Half of humanity's fleet was gone, thousands dead, entire colonies stripped of defenders. But the Council armada was broken, not destroyed but scattered. Their unity cracked wider than ever, their fleets snarling at one another even as they limped away. On the bridge, Hall leaned against the console, his voice hoarse. "We've bled them, Commander, but we've bled ourselves dry in the process." Elias stared out at the void littered with wreckage. His chest rose and fell, his fists tight. "Yes," he said quietly, "but we're still alive, and as long as humanity breathes, the Council will never know peace again." Across the galaxy, intercepted transmissions painted the truth. Council commanders accusing each other of betrayal, fleets deserting battle lines, smaller species refusing reinforcements, mutiny whispered in sectors once thought unshakable. Silent Fang had done its work. The Council had not been destroyed, but the illusion of unity was gone. And Elias Kane knew exactly what came next. The chamber beneath Geneva was darker than ever. The War Council sat in silence, faces carved with exhaustion, shadows deep beneath their eyes. Maps and intercepted transmissions flickered on the walls, fragments of chaos, proof of fractures tearing the Council apart. But fractures weren't collapse, not yet. Admiral Harrow's gravel voice cut through the gloom. "Don't fool yourselves. They still outnumber us 10-1. If they remember how to fight like us instead of like bureaucrats, we'll be ash within the year." Murmurs filled the room. Doubt, fear, the truth none wanted to face. Elias Kane stood slowly, his palms pressed against the table, his jaw tight. His voice was steady, but it carried the fire that had burned since the first insult in that chamber of arrogance. "Then we don't let them heal," he said. "We break them further. We don't just fight their fleets, we tear their council apart." The room went silent, every eye turned to him. "How?" one general demanded. Elia's gaze hardened. "We cut the head off the snake." Intelligence had delivered an opportunity. A secret summit. The Council's commanders, desperate to salvage their unity, would meet in a hidden station at the fringe of neutral space. There, away from the public eye, they would attempt to rally their fractured fleets to patch the bleeding cracks. If they succeeded, humanity was finished. But if the station burned, if the Council's leaders died together, then their alliance would collapse in chaos. The plan was suicide. Everyone knew it, yet no one argued. Operation Black Ash was set into motion. The Resolute limped from dockyards, patched again, its scars layered with steel. Around it, a fleet of destroyers and cruisers gathered, dark ships with weapons primed, their crews hollow-eyed but unflinching. Elias walked the decks one last time. Marines strapped on armor, their faces pale but resolute. Engineers kissed family photos before vanishing into engine bays. Officers whispered last words to each other in the shadows. No one expected to return, and no one cared. Hall met him on the bridge, arms folded, his face lined with weariness but burning with something fierce. "Commander, if we do this, humanity will never be forgiven. We'll be feared, hated, hunted forever." Elias met his eyes, his voice was iron. "Good, let them hate us, let them fear us. As long as humanity exists, I don't care what they call us." Hall gave a grim smile. "Then let's make it a night they never forget." The fleet moved like ghosts through the void. Smugglers cleared the way. Minor species turned blind eyes. Humanity had become a storm, and no one wanted to stand in its path. And then the station appeared. It gleamed against the black like a crown of steel, massive and fortified, its defenses bristling. Around it, patrols drifted in perfect arcs. Inside were the voices that had mocked humanity, the mouths that had demanded its extinction. Elias stood at the viewport, staring at it with clenched fists. Years of blood and fire, humiliation and vengeance narrowed to this one moment. "They thought we would kneel," he muttered. "Tonight we show them how wrong they were." The first strike came from hidden mines, detonating along the patrol routes. Alien ships erupted in fire before they even realized the Terrans were there. Seconds later, the fleet roared forward. Railguns thundered, torpedoes screamed. The void erupted in blinding chaos. The Resolute tore into their lines, slugs ripping through shields, detonations lighting the dark like a storm of suns. "Push through," Elias barked. "The station is the target, nothing else matters." The Resolute carved a path through fire, its hull screaming, its guns hammering. Marines launched in drop pods, plunging toward the station's docking rings. Elias was among them. The breach was fire and steel. Terran Marines stormed the station's corridors, rifles blazing. Alien defenders shrieked, their weapons flashing, but they were cut down in brutal waves. Grenades thundered, smoke choked the air, walls shook with detonations. Elias led the charge, his rail rifle hammering, Hall at his side with a combat blade dripping in blood. Step by step, they carved a path toward the command chamber. Half their force was gone by the time they reached it. Armor cracked, eyes hollow, but those still standing did not waver. "This is it," Elias said, his voice raw but burning. "No matter what happens, those bastards die tonight." The doors blew inward. The chamber was vast, lit by holograms of stars. The Council's commanders stood clustered around a grand table, Archery, Althari, Cathari, and more, the architects of humanity's near extinction. They froze as humans stormed in. Disbelief, rage, fear. The speaker's shimmering light flared, its voice booming like thunder. You dare defile this council with your savagery." Elias raised his rifle and fired. The speaker's form shattered in a burst of brilliance, dissolving into sparks. The chamber erupted in chaos. Guards rushed forward, weapons blazing. Marines cut them down in a storm of bullets and grenades. Alien commanders shrieked orders, some drawing weapons themselves, others cowering behind the table. But there was no escape. Elias surged forward, firing into the chaos, his rifle hammering. Hall tore through an archery with his blade, his face twisted with fury. Marines fanned out, slaughtering the leaders of the galaxy like cattle in a pen. A feathered Althari commander screamed defiance before Elias, rifle cut her down. A Cathari warlord lunged with claws, only to be gutted by Hall's knife. In minutes, the chamber was a slaughterhouse. When the smoke cleared, silence fell. The council was dead. Alarms screamed across the station. Reinforcements were flooding in. Entire fleets converged. The Resolute still fought outside, its hull burning, but it wouldn't last. Hall staggered to Elias' side, blood running down his face. His voice was hoarse, cracked. "Commander, we did it, but we'll never get out." Elias nodded slowly. The truth was heavy but steady. "Then we make sure they never forget." Charges were planted across the chamber, across the station's core. Marines moved with grim purpose, no hesitation. They knew they weren't coming home, and they didn't care. When the last charge was set, Elias stood at the center of the ruined chamber, staring at the blood-soaked table where the galaxy had once ruled. He thought of Earth, of the insults, of the fires, of the graves. "This," he whispered, "is humanity's answer." The charges blew. The explosion lit the void like a newborn star. The station erupted, fire tearing through its rings, shockwaves ripping across orbit. Alien ships caught in the blast shattered instantly. The Council's leaders, their pride, their fortress, all consumed in one final blaze. The Resolute never made it out. None of them did. But their sacrifice was not in vain. Across the galaxy, the shockwaves were not of fire but of fear. The Council was gone, its fleets scattered, its unity shattered, its species bickering in the aftermath. What had once been an empire of arrogance was now a carcass, torn apart by its own pride and humanity's fury. And Earth still stood. When news of the strike reached humanity, there was no cheering, no celebration, only silence, a silence that spoke louder than any roar. Humanity had survived. Humanity had avenged. Humanity had taken its place among the stars. Not as equals, not as allies, but as predators. The galaxy would never forget the night the Council fell. They had mocked us, they had laughed at us, they had tried to erase us. Now they would fear us. Forever,